Good morning. It's May 24th and time for another episode of NASA Days. In today's episode, we're going to look at upgrading the main engine controller. Now, the Marshall Space Flight Center, which manages the SSME project, started working on upgrading the engine controller from its Block 1 configuration to a Block 2 configuration. Block 1 was itself a repurposed Air Force fire control computer from a jet that was made to work on a space shuttle main engine. It had 16 kilobytes or kilo words of 16K of plated wire memory, which was non-volatile. The new Block 2 configuration was going to be based on Motorola's 68,000 microprocessor, which fortunately I studied at FIT. It had 64K words of static random access memory and was held up by a battery backup. It was designed in a self-checking pair configuration, and what that means is there are two microprocessors in the computer and two address buses and two data buses and two sets of memory. Every bus cycle, the address bus and the data bus are compared, and they have to match exactly, or that computer is deemed to have failed, and the redundant self-checking pair computer will take over and control the engine. There's also a 2K circular buffer of all the address and data buses and the interrupt levels and things like that, which was called a failure data recorder. And we could read out the failure data recorder and send it to the ground just as we could read out memory. So I took the lead in organizing the Kennedy Space Center's impacts to this new Block 2 engine controller. We had launch processing system software impacts, and we had all of our ground software applications that had to be pretty much rewritten from scratch. So we brought in additional software developers to help, and the ground software team assigned a project manager to manage this big project, and I was the technical representative to make sure that everyone was on the same page during the development. I had to make sure that everyone working on this project at the Kennedy Space Center understood what the changes were to the interface control document. It was a massive task, and they made no claim that it would be a transparent change. And so most of the times they say it's a transparent change, and it's not. They said this is not going to be transparent. You're going to have to start over from the beginning and rewrite everything. So the first flight of the Block 2 engine controller occurred on Space Shuttle Endeavour's maiden flight, STS-49. It launched in May of 1992, and all three engines had the new Block 2 engine controller on them. We had a meeting where you get to meet the crew before the launch, and people usually get a picture of the crew and get the crew to autograph their pictures. That's what most people would do. What did I do? I had a picture of a Block 2 engine controller, and I got the entire crew of STS-49 to sign it. They said they'd never signed something like that before. They were just kind of blown away by it, but they were excited. I talked to them briefly about the upcoming flight and the fact that it was the first flight with the new Block 2 engine controllers, and they were not worried in the least. So later in the summer of 1992, I was asked to take part in a special team that was being formed to do an audit of the Space Shuttle main engine controller software. There was a kickoff meeting that lasted 2 weeks out in Canoga Park, California, which was the home of where Rocketdyne was. Here we were given an overview of the system, the software requirements, how the software was organized. I arrived on day one in a suit and tie. There was a lot of bigwigs in town for the initial kickoff meeting, and they were in attendance. But to balance the suit and tie, I had a pair of Nike sneakers. I didn't own any dress shoes back then. The leader of the team mentioned later that it was at that moment he knew that I was real and not just some management guy that they brought down to be on the team that I was somebody that understood what was going on because I was wearing sneakers. So I had some street cred. We spent 2 weeks with the software development team, asking them questions, getting a good overview of the software. We would go out to dinner with some of the team, have after work and have drinks, and we developed a friendship between them. After the initial 2 weeks meeting, I flew to Huntsville, Alabama, where the engine project was located. And I spent about 3 months there. I did my time in Huntsville for 3 months, and it was in the fall and it was cold, and this is a Florida girl. But anyway, I digress. I was working in building 4487, which is a 3-wing building, which was where the avionics teams lived. Next door to it was the Huntsville Simulation Lab. That's where they tested and verified the main engine controller software. I was given the executive software and sensor processing software to audit. Now, the code was written in the C language. Previously, it had been written in assembly, and that was a big discussion because when you design something in C and compile it, what you get may not be the same every time depending on the compiler you use. So we had to strictly control the compiler. Very interesting discussions. It had a large pool of global variables that they used throughout the engine program. One of the findings we discovered is on the sensor processing that I was reviewing was one part of sensor qualification was checking a sensor value for limits, upper and lower limits. And if it failed the limits, it would call a subroutine passing the channel value of what channel to disqualify. Now, in the subroutine, the channel value was a local variable. It had the same name as the global variable. So, initial look, you'd think they set the global variable for what channel, and then they would call this subroutine. And in the subroutine, they didn't pass the channel value by reference. So the value of the channel value as a local subroutine was some random variable, whatever was on the stack. And so they could be disqualifying the wrong sensor. So I wrote this up. It was deemed that it was a criticality 1 issue and needed to be fixed before the next engine test at the Stennis Space Center. On the whole, the team, we discovered hundreds of issues with the flight software. We wrote them up. We wrote up a final report, presented it to the Space Shuttle main engine project manager. He was very appreciative of the work we did. And my experiences on this team led to my growth in many ways. Not only did I make new friends and acquaintances on the development side for flight software, I came away with a detailed understanding of the main engine controller software that would be invaluable in my career. Including that time, I saved a launch. But that's a story for another day. We'll talk to you later.